Good afternoon, beautiful people. Dr. Eve back in the studio today for another TOLTM conversation. Oh, what an amazing time. Just coming off the cusp of the NABSW conference in Richmond, Virginia. And I'm back in the research, everyone. Back in the research. I had an exciting time. Actually, was a presenter on a team presenter, co-facilitator, and I actually looked at how we use AI enhancements for qualitative research and interpretive analysis. So it was very, very exciting. And of course, I am in that phase of my life where I am making decisions about what's next for me. And I am enjoying the research element of it all. You all know that a part of decisions that we make in this time are critical, right? And over this lifetime, we have to sometimes we have to pivot to what's best for us in the new climate. And I'm just super excited and have that I have been blessed, to understand the research process and to be a participant in this space. And so I'm excited to bring to you more research, more studies, more conversations about the concerns that you have, and that maybe your agencies have, or your families have, or your communities, about what's happening in the world and why are we making the decisions that we are making. So I am super excited again today to be back before you, rested, back home in the garden. And I'm super excited because I really missed walking outside of my door each morning and engaging with the elements of the earth, hearing the birds and the my chickens, and tending to them and growing flowers, and just being present with God's things, all of his things. I am a believer, so naturally all things God for me. And so I'm excited to bring to you an article. I have decided to, just learn a little bit more about why people chose homesteading. This is not a new phenomenon, right? And so, because it isn't, where did it all begin? And what does the evidence say about, this new journey that a lot of people are taking into homesteading? And where did it come from? And so I was, most happy to explore some scholarly research and discover that there is a lot of data in at the Pew Research did a lot of research on public trust. Public trust, right? And what does that mean, right? And so I decided to dig a little further as a homesteader at this phase in my life, growing food and teaching others how to solve their own problems, when the social contract has failed us, right? And what do I mean about the social contract? That the government accountability and public trust. And so I'm really excited. Stumbled upon a piece of literature from Powers out of Tennessee State University, and it was such an interesting read that I want to share it with you all today because it was really spot on for the era in which we are now living. And so in this particular article, it is they're talking, honing in most importantly on why people homesteaded. What led people to homesteading over time, and how it related to public trust. So there were three very important times, historic epochs, moments in time when people really did lean into going back to the land movement, or homesteading, modern homesteading. So we're going to talk a little bit about those epic moments in time when people chose to go back to homesteading, for they needed to rely on what they had, what was available to them, and how we now continue this journey even in this time. So this abstract talked about public trust as an integral to the smooth functioning of our public sector. So I don't know how many of you remember, but I am of the age that I remember the conversations and the times of the Vietnam War and Woodstock. That was during the 1960s and 70s. A time of just getting back of enormous difficulty in our communities, right? So the author introduces this, talks about not just the Vietnam War, Woodstock, 1960s and 70s, but another epic moment was the politicization of the climate change in the 1990s. And of course, we realized there was this another epic moment more recently in the 2020s when we dealt with C-19, right? And the 2020s when people also fled back to growing food and finding out and making do and trying to figure out life, right? And this to me, it became a form of social activism in response to our inability to trust what was before us, right? And these times or these epic moments influenced major spikes in urban homesteading, and that is what we're going to be talking about today. Back to the land movement, urban homesteading, and modern homesteading, and what led us to this, and how did the impact of public trust lead us here. So in the introduction of the article, they really talk about, pull out this very important conversation around public trust as the cornerstone of effective governance in the public sector. And when it isn't, when governance, the functionality of government institution, when the citizens do not trust, the governance of these institutions are at risk. And so we're going to explore again the lowest periods of government trust and analyze the corresponding responses of its citizens. So each decline, each substantial decline in government trust aligns with a notable phenomenon. And that phenomenon was the pursuit of autonomy from government oversight through a return to the land movement or back to the land movement, where an idealistic hippies of the 1960s and 70s sought to remove themselves from the rat race. I remember those days, they were just not having it anymore, right? You could see it in some of the behavior, some of the resistance that showed up in that time. Now, in the 1990s, witnessed a surge in homesteading in response to climate change fears of the climate changing. Presently, we are observing a rekindling of the back to the land movement, often referred to as modern homesteading. Each one of these movements were centered around autonomy. Each centered autonomy from government oversight to subsistence farming, a means of economy, cultural, and spiritual self-defense. Homesteading as a response to low public trust. So he points to the literature for some of this. Trust is a key component of efficient and effective operation. When we don't have that, we have what's called a broken social contract, right? In keeping with government accountability from a public service perspective, it is the responsibility for keeping the government accountable and providing trustworthy information to the public to promote democracy. So we must keep government accountable. Public trust and public sector effectiveness are two concepts that are inextricably connected and therefore can serve as a foundation for public decisions that serve the public interest. There was a new system, new public management model emerged in part because of this trust between administrators, elected officials, and citizens. And it goes on to talk about this model sought to restore public trust by embracing private sector principles so to improve effectiveness and efficiency. I think when I began to read this, I began to see a lot of what we're looking at today. Privatization was believed to be a means of cutting costs in response to fiscal crises such as oil shortages. Does that sound familiar? And the expansion of welfare services, things that are being cut in this very moment. Now, as a researcher, uh, I am here to have an objective view, and I'm here to just explore the research. But where this research carries us is to a time in which we live, and I think that that's critically important for us to note. The however, this new model has also been criticized, which we know it to be for creating problems and challenges and fragmentation, complexity, loss of coordination, erosion of public values, and reduced trust among public employees and its stakeholders. I was wowed by that moment, that revelation, because it's where we are today. It's where and how we're living due to new public management models, right? The author goes on to talk about a little bit more about how this paradoxically undermined public trust by creating distrust. And is that not what we are feeling today? A level of distrust that implies that public servants are self interested and needed to be monitored and incentivized. So that goes deeper. We're going to be exploring a lot of the research here because I think it's going to take us on to a journey of getting some clarity and understanding of what we are witnessing today, to help us make some more informed decisions. And also, let's not make this homesteading thing a thing that happens at low points, epic moments in our society, because we don't ever want to vacate our freedom, right? And that's where I'm going with this. At any moment, I want to be and build a sustainable life. And part of building a sustainable life is never giving up the freedoms and controls of my ability to sustain when things go left, right? So that's very important. So, what happens when trust is low? What happens when trust is low, or what happened when the trust was low? So, consequently, um, bodies of literature on the consequences of low public trust have generally centered on approval of elected officials and support for use of public resources to achieve policy goals. So let's go on to the author talking about trust is an important determinant, and we all know this to be true, of the quality of services delivered by the public sector. So public cynicism imposed a threat to this entire system of governance, that without trust from the public, the continued function of government would fail. 1974. And so we saw much of that. So the viewpoints, some of the literature from Miller and Citron's viewpoints suggest that when trust is low, voters are more likely to support, and I need y'all to hear this. When trust is low, voters are more likely to support third party and non incumbent candidates, as well as to reject the use of public resources for policy initiatives. This is a point that I found interesting, because of the way things swayed in this last election climate, right? The author says when trust is low, and this is research, y'all. State Presley Powers, Tennessee State University, Public Trust and Homesteading as a Form of Social Activism. When public trust is low, voters are more likely to support third party non incumbent candidates, as well as to reject the use of public resources for policy initiatives. So this may lead us to get clear, more understanding about why people swayed the way that they did. I mean, it's in the research. and I tend to look at the research. When trust is high, the government can gain citizen compliance without having to use methods of coercion, like, buying power, buying, votes, or incentivizing things to help us to sway the vote, right? So these are things that are critically important. In the legitimacy of the public sector, the author goes on to explore the literature that was available on how accepting and supportive citizens are of their government's authority and decision making, when there is public trust or not. Public trust enhances compliance. That's what goes on, and which is clear right here, and gets a reciprocal response, right? Citizens are more engaged when they trust. I need that to be a highlight. Citizens are more engaged when they trust. And what are we seeing now? Without public trust, legitimacy or public sector is hindered. And what do people lead? What does that lead to? A broken social contract. What is a social contract? In a democratic society, citizens agree to abide by the rules and decisions of the government without the need for coercion in exchange for protection of their rights and well-being. Let me say that again. Citizens agree to abide by the rules and decisions of the government without the need for coercion in exchange for protection of their rights and well-being. So when trust is present, citizens provide their consent to be governed, right? But I am of the belief that as a kingdom believer, that I'm only governed by the one true and living God. So trust in the government is the belief that the government is fulfilling its end of the bargain. Is the government fulfilling its end of the bargain? Or did we have a breach in the social contract? So public trust therefore contributes to the government's ability to govern effectively, as well as implement policies that align with the interests of the citizens. As a result, public trust and political legitimacy are deeply interconnected and mutually reinforcing. Now let's get to these epic moments. Now that we've explored a little bit about the literature and the why and how public trust is maintained or broken or breached for that matter, let's take a deeper dive into these epic moments, time in history when people didn't trust, right? Let's go back to the first one, which blossomed during the 1960s and the early 1970s, which represented a quest for simplicity and self-reliance by forging a deep connection with the land. This movement was the Back to the Land movement, which we know happened during the 60s and the 70s. It attracted idealistic individuals from the post-Woodstock era. That would be the era in which I was born, who yearned to break free from a system that they no longer believed in, right? Its rallying cry, make do with less, minimize. It encouraged self-sufficiency and a lifestyle independent of dominant institutional cultures, which is what we often talk about, creating for us, by us, to serve us, so that we have alternatives to dominant institutional cultures. This was really good to me to find this literature in writing. It's part of an even bigger study that I will share. Let me see if I can find that. I'll find that document for you all, and I'll share it in the in the comment section. So he goes on to talk about the proponents of this movement: simplicity with happiness and autonomy. That is what the people desired: simplicity, happiness, and autonomy. In this era, that is what many of us are seeking. We're seeking simplicity, happiness, and autonomy. Do we need that from big government? Absolutely not. I don't understand why we left the movement. Why we left, and but in the research gives me a heads up to why, right? So they wanted fewer possessions. They had lived a minimalist life in pursuit of self determination. Now, that's one of the basic principles that I live by, is that I have the right to determine, and you have the right to determine one's life, right? And the path, right? At its core, it entailed the pursuit of self determination through subsistence farming, right? The central theme was exerting control over consumption. For example, I posted yesterday about producing roses. I love roses. I love flowers. I want them every day. But if I'm consuming them all the time, then much of my money is going to a retailer to provide these flowers for me when I can become a producer. So what I did was I became a producer of cut flowers. I produce roses, I produce my cut flowers, I produce my plant life, I produce the things that make me happy, right? So there are methods to this madness that we can exert control over consumption, both physically and material, which is defined much of the back to the land movement. This is good. This was so good to me, y'all. This was so good to me. It was believed that while everyone is inside the system, because we are, except we remove ourselves entirely, and there is a method to do that, right? That, which is why you hear people say, I'm going off the grid. I want to go off the grid, right? It's back. Let's get off the grid. There are methods of subverting it from within, which is achieved every time a person moves from consumption to production. So for every time you make a move to go from consumption to production, you subvert from within. All right, moving from consumption to productive, living resistance to participation. That is what results from moving from consumption to production, a living resistance to participation. So they go on now to talk about the government trust, how it began. It eroded in the 60s. There was disillusionment over the government's handling of the Vietnam War. You know, when our soldiers came back, how they were mistreated. It fueled a desire for self-sufficiency. And it reduced reliance on government oversight, right? Who wants to be watched after, right? Separation from governmental bodies through subsistence farming presented itself as a means of self-defense. Now, who would ever want to let go of that, right? Who would ever want to let go? But there were some things that led to the dissipation of this movement, right? And that began to happen. Let's see. Well, let's go back. People yearn for greater control over their lives in response to this negative connotation, decision making, and distrust of the government. This movement was inherently peaceful, right? With its adherents turning to the land to satisfy their needs while minimizing the interference of the government. It was an objective that required less, and it liberated people from the shackles of government oversight. So if any of you you weren't born during that time, then you don't know. But we are living in a time that's very, very similar to the Woodstock era, right? In the 1970s, these Americans had become considerably untrusting of the government decision making, and so the political system continues to suffer today from both Vietnam War and the Watergate, continues to suffer today, and is very skeptical of the things that are happening today. So I mentioned that that by the close of the 70s, this movement began to dissipate. And there were reasons why, and I want you to listen up, okay? By the close of the 1970s, this movement began to dissipate due to rising living costs. I need you to hear history while I'm sharing this information. I need you to say how history does repeat itself. So there is this rise in living costs, rise energy crises, and expanding employment opportunities. Except we are seeing a little bit of both of some of these things and not the other. So in 1973, the Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries imposed an oil embargo, leading to fuel shortages and soaring costs. Smithsonian, 1973. The embargo placed a financial strain on numerous American households as they struggled to secure fuel for transportation, hear me, further reinforcing their dependence on stable employment and consistent income. So, what happened? Simultaneously, this era witnessed a surge in the number of women who entered the workforce. The second wave that took hold in the 60s, resulting in unprecedented job growth for women in the early 70s, and women migrated to the workforce by the masses, which ran counter to this movement, right? Because those who were doing this good work back to the land, many of them were women. Make doing with less philosophy, creating an ever increasing list of necessities that could not be realistically fulfilled through subsistence farming, right? So the reason for finding themselves back into this movement or into the workforce, the rise, was because of the inability to realistically rely on subsistence farming as a way, right? So we found ourselves in the workforce away from the subsistence farming that involved producing most of one's livestock, crops to meet their family's needs. Though, thus, these factors compelled adherents to back to land movement to re-enter the job market. So became we entered the job market. So in the 1990s, yet another list. Wait a minute, I need to go back to that for a second, because entering the job market, once again, relying on regular income to cope with fuel shortages and energy crises. Okay, so let's move on because I'm sorry, I want to get through this because it was so good to me, right? So then they move on to, for those that remained concerned about the changing climate. Okay, I'm sorry, let me go back. In the 1990s, another epic time in which public trust emerged was during the climate change era. And during that time, it influenced a great political divide began to emerge. Partisan lines were drawn, scientific research was subjected to politicization, partisan think tanks emerged, yada, yada, yada. And for those that remain concerned about the changing climate, a series of movements emerged. Again, urban homesteading, for instance, became a popular way for city dwellers to locally source and produce food and household items. So it was very intentional. During this time, farmers markets surged in popularity as a means of green consumerism, right? Can make the connection. Climate change, urban homesteading, food markets. Okay, I'm sorry. So during this time, by the late 1990s, there was the introduction of food, not lawns. I thought this was interesting because I often say food, not grass. Let's grow food, not grass. But during this time, I see it emerged. There was a saying called food, not lawns movement. And it had gained traction by encouraging suburban communities to replace monoculture lawns with food sources. It makes sense. It makes all the good sense to me to utilize the land for more purposive reasons, right? Um, so, as with homesteading, urban homesteading, the focus was on locally sourcing food items to be more environmentally conscious, green, right? And healthy now, because we're going to get into what emerged even from that epic moment in time. So decades later, there has been notable resurgence into the back to land movement, with today's largely millennial generation rejecting government oversight in favor of what? Self-sufficiency. One has the right to determine oneself. It all goes back to one has the right to determine oneself. This contemporary research is often referred to as homesteading, focusing on autonomy through subsistence agriculture. Participants in this resurgence distance themselves from government institutions, dominant institutional cultures, getting off the grid. You hear people talk about it all the time. Their motivations were deeply entwined with concerns about food safety, healthcare, and climate change. All of this is what we see today, coupled with your yearning to disconnect from this digital world. It is so invasive at times. Can it be used for good? Absolutely. But if we are not intentional about the way we allow it into our lives, we can succumb to everything and lose everything that we are. Ideologically conservative with religious motivations and a belief that man has dominion over the land. I stand in that today. I stand in that wholeheartedly because I believe it started in the garden, life began in the garden, and it's going to end in the garden. And that we inherently have the right to the dominion over this land because our Father said, kingdom come. That is kingdom come. This is our land. He gave to us to cultivate, to nurture, to grow, and to produce in every way. So this back to the land movement or modern homesteading revolved around the core concept of autonomy over oneself and one's environment. You have the right. Furthermore, concerns about food safety, healthcare, and climate change have driven individuals back to the land to take charge of what their family consumes. You all, this was written in 2016, and we are living this real time. We are living this real time, okay? A common thread in this movement, with all other movements, assuming control over food production, worries about sourcing and chemical additives are alleviated. And the common thread in this movement was fear. Not unlike the movements of the 90s, spawned by criticism of science and a rejection of the modern healthcare system. But this was more centered, modern homesteading is more centered around fear. This epic moment was centered around fear of what's going in our bodies, fear of what they're doing to the food, fear of all the things, right? And then we had C-19. This thing brought to light the distrust that had been brewing across decades, for decades, when many homesteaders became very great skepticism at its effectiveness and safety, right? The things that government oversight of this thing created skepticism and its effectiveness and safety. In response, many homesteaders like myself were prompted to do what? Explore natural medicine alternatives as people sought to enhance their self reliance. It's in the research, y'all. 2016, 2021, delays and short, because we experienced, these were things that we literally experienced. Delays and shortages generated frustrations, while uncertainties and quarantine measures fueled apprehension and lots of conspiracy theories. So, but what we're seeing today, it was not a conspiracy, y'all. It was not. These factors converge to intensify the desire for autonomy. Pipelines for goods and services proved more effective than conventional grocery stores for many. Herbal medicines and immune boosters gained popularity as the vax hesitancy drove many away from mainstream medicine. Natural approaches to managing health concerns. And what we're seeing is what, back to the land, God said we had everything we needed was in the garden. I'm just going to go ahead and say that. He said everything we needed was in the garden. There was lots of rejections of recommendations from prominent doctors, and government organizations grew throughout the first year of that pandemic. In addition to this distrust of administrative state, the public began questioning the legitimacy of the election process, right? So we began to see now these epic moments and the consistency of these epic moments and what they all had in common. And so, in the analysis, public administration scholars studied public trust and its impact on the legitimacy of the public sector. And other scholars have found that public trust ensures effective and have found that their public trust ensures effective and efficient government, both factors that have significant implications for legitimacy. Without the support of the public, administrators and elected officials are severely limited to their ability to leverage public resources for effective policy implementation. Despite these incredibly valuable contributions to the field of public administration, it is also of the utmost importance for scholars to understand what happens when social movements emerge in response to low public trust. So when y'all are looking around and you see everyone popping up to have self-sufficiency, there were epic moments in time that we can reflect upon that drove us, those of us who understand, into renewed self-sufficiency, into creating for us, by us, to serve us for self-sufficiency. When we create that, when we create these social movements, social activism, which is critically important, when we begin to diversify our skill sets, so that we no longer have to rely on employers, because what do we see? That you cannot rely. Although there was this resurgence of women entering the workforce, what we're seeing now is no job was secure. We're back at that moment where we let go of the very thing that gave us the self-sufficiency that we needed. We should never, and this has always been my mantra, do not leave yourself behind, lady. Do never leave yourself behind. You have a set of skills. You have a set of talent that God given talents. There's no way that we should be working to build the empire of another, leaving behind the empire that we are to create for our families. We have these skills, sell them, baby, and contract those skills, right? And then find out how you can now utilize those skills in a way to integrate or pivot, even in pivotal times like this, where, like this, I have so many skills, right? But at the top of those is my research lens, my ability to look at research, my ability to help others to do research, my ability to help individuals, companies, communities, whatever that is, to move through the research, to hear the voices of the people, to integrate new systems and technology to enhance our ability to reduce the time in which we do research. And so I had the opportunity to conduct research with an AI enhanced model assistant, modeling as my passive assistant, to help me to review the data, tons of data from focus groups. And it was amazing, the themes that emerged. And when you have the right philosophy and the right theory and the right um, categories or interviewing methods, you can literally produce research in days. So it's an exciting time for me because not only am I creating self-sufficiency through modern, call it what you want, homesteading, farming, whatever people want to call it. I call it homesteading because I not only am I growing chickens and producing my own food, I harvest seeds, I create an opportunity to sell plants to others, and making sure others are producing and getting healthy alternatives, right? So how are we doing what we need to move the mission? So social movements that emerge from low government trust. This is a significant gap that prevents scholars in the field of public administration from truly understanding how societal responses to low trust can materialize into social movements. So we're going to be talking a lot more now about how did this process move us into, again, the continuation of homesteading. How did the election process move us even further into that process? And what I can clearly see from the research is there's a model being used called the new public management model, which we need to explore a lot more because it utilizes private sector principles, right? Which is what we're seeing now, not elect, but private sector, privatization, all of these things, which I see a movement into that right now, right before our very eyes. And so, again, I am Dr. Eve. It's been an honor and a privilege to be before you again today to discuss homesteading and the impact of public trust. What led us here, and what can we take away from what we've learned today? So, you all, it's been an amazing journey with you all. The examination of these historical epic times in our society revealed a consistent phenomenon. In periods of diminished trust, individuals seek autonomy through subsistence farming, manifesting as the back to the land movement. All right. So, you guys, I'm going to be doing a whole lot. Look forward to follow me doing some research in this area, using AI enhancements as my go-to methodology. I have was one of the historic leaders in qualitative studies utilizing mobile applications, the integration of mobile applications, which led me to this new and innovative approach to utilize AI enhanced modes of intelligence that I give it, right? Because we remember that it's a tool. but we must give it intelligence. And so I'm super excited about this next journey into qualitative research. So again, thanks for coming. If you haven't liked or shared the video, please do so. Follow me as we begin to talk more about why you should be homesteading. Maybe this should not be the result of an epic distrust. This should be something that you do for self-sufficiency. And we don't let go of what gives us the security, right? The security in knowing that I can grow food, the security in knowing that I can raise livestock, the security in knowing that as long as I have seed, I have food, the security in knowing these things moves me from consumer to producer. Okay. Peace and blessings to you all. And until the next time, have the most amazing day. And whatever you do, let no one get in the way on your journey to becoming who God has called you to become. Peace and blessings, my beautiful people. Until the next time, see you on the next video.